Acho. Okay, this is going to be very different, and apologies to the interpreter trying to translate my Irish accent. I hope you all understand exactly what I'm going to say. So I might stand out a bit every now and again because I have to do a few performative actions to explain what goes on in my practice. So first of all, I'm an Irish visual artist and I use myself as my canvas. I start off usually with a drawing and a proposal for some of my performative works, especially when I'm considering how they fit into space and locations. As you can see, can everybody see what I'm wearing? I would describe myself as a goth. I am very interested in Gothic culture. I love that miserable Gothic music, I'm sorry. But I'm particularly interested in Gothic literature, which I have to say, as an Irish person, we own the Gothic, sorry, but we own Joseph Sheridan, Laffanau, Bram Stoker, and I'm going to claim Edgar Allan Poe because his parents were from Cavan. So a lot of my work would feature a lot of Gothic aesthetics, and I would have in the past, for the European Capital of Culture, which was Cork in 2005, my own home county, I made a number of performances cited in these unusual non-gallery locations. But I'm going to move on. I had a bit of a crisis and I was living in this house. Now, we were talking about architecture all day long the past 2 days. I'm just going to talk to you about architectural failures. In Ireland, we fell in love with the American aesthetic of the cookie cutter home. And we built 500,000 of these type of houses all over our vernacular rural villages and outside our towns and cities. And even though we have a housing crisis in Dublin at the moment, where we have 10,000 people homeless, we have currently 250,000 empty houses like this. And for me, someone who was interested in the Gothic, I thought these are the most haunted of houses, for they will never be lived in. And they are at various different stages of being built. And I lived in one. I should also say that in the Irish Constitution, it ascribes in Article 41.1.2 that a woman's place is in the home. So I shouldn't even be here today. I should be at home doing the washing up. So when you are ascribed a gender role like that, you become other because you have committed the crime of being born with your sexual organs on the inside of your body. So you're different, so you should be treated different. It's really interesting hearing your presentation earlier on talking about otherness. I am going to show you. So I started making a film called Levitating. Initially I shot it wearing what you see me wearing now, but in this housing estate that I lived in for 7 years. So I spent 7 days jumping, 1, 2, 3, jump, 1, 2, 3, jump, 1, 2, 3, jump, 1, 2, 3, jump, taking a photograph of me in mid-jump to create the optical illusion of movement and of seamlessly floating while perfecting my role ascribed to me in the Irish Constitution. All around the housing estates and locations that I live in. And initially I shot it in what you see me wearing now, and I looked at it and I realised that I didn't look like every other Irish woman. I needed to go back and readjust the costume to fit into the architecture, to fit into the location. And I bought the unthinkable thing, which was blue jeans and white runners and a green top, and I reshot the whole thing, all 64,000 jumps and photographs to create this illusion. Okay. So anyway, this is just a little snippet of that. I also used to curate projects in my home, in this Celtic tiger suburbia, because art does not just happen in exhibition spaces and in white cube spaces, as Virginia pointed out in her presentation. It actually happens in the cracks in between all of our lives. And art is for everyone. So I try to bring my art to everyone. So I used to curate projects and publish books about house projects as a name of art exhibition. But my biggest passion is to revisit the canon of art history and the canon of history, because truth is a very fragile thing, as Partha gave his presentation early on. This is my first cousin who used to babysit me in Cork in Ireland, and she actually graduated from and emigrated to America in the 80s because Ronald Reagan had a program called the Star Wars program, where he was trying to militarize space, kind of what Donald Trump is doing. Anyway, long story short, she joined NASA, tried to become the first Irish person in space, was shortlisted 25 times to captain Endeavour or Discovery, this space shuttle, and was going to be the first Irish person in space. That's my first cousin. And yet you've never heard of her. And that is because I think she did the same thing that I did and didn't obey the Irish Constitution. So I made a proposal to NASA to help me beat my cousin in the race for space and to go to this place of modernity and to train to be an astronaut. And they took me on board on a 6-week training program, and I check out the hair in zero gravity. Brilliant. I shot films in zero gravity in this unusual architecture, this gravity-defying architecture. And I made a whole series of films where I became half Hoover, half human, doing my domestic chores in a projection of a future space. Okay, after that I was asked by Art Basel and a gallery called Mother's Tank Station to bring zero gravity to Switzerland. Now, I blame James Bond for this because people think you can just make zero gravity and it doesn't really work like that, but a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. So I decided to look at the history of art fairs, which is where this was going to be cited. And art fairs grew out of the world fairs, and there used to be presentations of world fairs all over the world where villages and towns would manifest in the Champs-Élysées, which gave the Eiffel Tower, and etc., etc. So I proposed to make a piece of taking remote control helicopters and making myself fly using remote control. So this was the drawing. I also wanted to recreate the Marilyn Monroe effect from the 7-Year Itch. I should say I initially went to a group of elderly gentlemen in Ireland called the Remote Control Flying Club of Ireland, because I wanted to learn how would you control 40 remote control helicopters off one remote, and they said it cannot be done. And I said, no, I know it can be done, and I persevered and I taught myself how to trim helicopters to get them to work off one remote, as you see here, and I went back to them. And they then made me the poster girl for the Remote Control Flying Club of Ireland. Art happens in the cracks. Anyway, so this is a little clip from the performance, which was then re-performed in Dublin and Ireland afterwards. That's all I'm going to show you of that. I'm sorry. If you want to see it, bring me here to Kaunas to make me perform it. Look at that. Anyway, sorry. After that, I went back because this idea of remote control is actually really important to me. And if you can see, I'm using humour as a way of talking about very dark subject matter. And there's a lot of literary artists in Ireland, Samuel Beckett in particular, for example, who used humour as an agent to talk about dark things. After I'd made this piece, the economic crash had happened in Ireland, and so I went back to make a whole series of performative films in these redundant housing estates. That's not just one house, that's about 50 houses and up on the top left-hand corner. And I use remotes. I lie down on the grass, I have a remote in my mouth, I've sent my partner to climb the roof of the neighbouring house to point the camera down. I really laughed at Camilla's discussion of the ladder, I can relate to that. And I have to click, take the photograph, get back out of the picture, bring in the lawnmower, cut the grass, get back out, take the picture, get back down, take the photograph, and that will give me less than a second of photographs to make the optical illusion of movement. Anyway, these are some snippets from the performative film. So just to give you an idea, this is like an image of one of my films, and this is actually how it happens. I don't have a fancy studio. I have 3 children, and my studio is the kitchen table, and my materials of my domestic space that I've been ascribed to are the materials of my artwork. So this is my kid's spare bedroom. And now I'm going to talk very quickly, and I know I'm probably going over time. Sorry if I'm going changing tracks. Vilta and Vadis very kindly heard me speaking about this project last year in Pesh and asked me to come here to talk today. I was very interested in the idea of where art meets the public and that negotiation process about how art is made. And so I was put forward for a public art commission, which was funded by the European Union Cultural Programme in 2014, called Changing Tracks. And it was going to happen in 3 different countries: in Ireland in Mayo, in Northamptonshire in the UK, and in Catalonia in Spain, just up here. And there were 3 artists selected. I was the Irish artist, and the plan was to make temporary artworks in all 3 locations around these sites for a period of 6 months. What was really interesting about the sites was that they were temporary, or they were now redundant locations or former railway lines that were now being converted into civic use. So it's really interesting to hear about your ambitions for the post office, because this is a very interesting, I suppose, aspirational project too. And then I wanted to go back to the idea of redressing the canon of history. This woman called Lilias Campbell Davidson wrote this book in 1892. Lilias was a very interesting character, and I'm sure, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of her. No? Somebody has, one person, but it's a bit shocking that not everybody has. She was a pioneer. She was a pre-suffragette and a feminist, and she believed that the goal of women's emancipation could be achieved through 2 means, which was the bicycle and rail travel. So she set up the first women's cycling association in the world, and she wrote this manual to encourage women to independently travel the railway lines, which had been discouraged up until then for women to travel unchaperoned. So she wrote this book, and it went out of print. She was a really interesting character, travelled all over the world, became a professor of Swahili and economics, and ended her days lecturing in the London School of Economics. And this is the book. But I got a copy of this book in a rare bookshop in London, and I immediately read it, and I went, this woman was as mad as I am, and it shows from her books. This is how she proposed you would wash while travelling. So she gave a manual of how you would take apart your domestic bathtub and turn it into a suitcase, and then you'd be on the railway lines travelling all over the world. You'd empty the contents of your bathtub out, strip off naked in your railway carriage, and have a bath. I think she sounds like me from 100 years ago. Anyway, I thought this woman needs to be celebrated, and in this tradition of the palimpsest, I decided to reimagine myself of Lilias Campbell Davidson. And I also, as an Irish person, we like Brazil, what's happened in Brazil with the museum burning down and all of their history being lost. This happened in Ireland during our War of Independence and our subsequent Civil War. Our records were lost due to a fire at the records office. And a lot of our records and archives are now being maintained by groups of volunteers who treasure and love these ancient documents. And they do this completely for free. And so I approached this group of gentlemen up in Dublin behind Heuston Station who were managing and keeping a record of all the railway lines of Ireland. And I went there and I found some incredible gems of knowledge to turn into my project. Anyway, so this is me as Lilias. Okay, could we turn up the audio just a little bit? Okay, so I made 40 animations. And I also worked with the descendants of the railway lines in the 3 countries. It was easier to do it in Ireland because there isn't that many of us that live in the west of Ireland. But in Mayo, I worked with the great-grandchildren and grandchildren of people who worked on the railway line. In particular, I worked with secondary schools of young women who I wanted to inspire them with the story of Lilias Campbell-Davidson. And using the photographs that I got from this record office, we worked together to create life-size replicas. Oh yes, I did loads of social engagement with this project, of the actual trains that travelled along the Olot to Girona line, the Mayo to Achill Mulranny line, and the Northamptonshire to London line. And then we did a number of stop-motion animation workshops, and then we brought the trains to life. This is a life-size replica in cardboard, using cotton wool and cardboard, and umbrellas for wheels. And this is this is 50 young students behind making this all work. Anyway, so that's just kind of some of the image. Okay, and then I also got to meet the most incredible people in Rushden and Northamptonshire who had collectively bought the last railway line and converted it into a pub. And the profits from the pub they were using to buy back bits of the line to convert it for civic use. All doing this for free, out of the love of the history. And so I also discovered old traditions that happened up in northern England, where they would cover their bicycles in flowers to celebrate Queen's Day and certain centenaries. And so this all became part of the stop-motion animations. And then I also brought some of the ideas from Lilias's book about new inventions like roller skates. These are Victorian roller skates which I created. And then she, of course, has to navigate the now green way of wearing the roller skates. Can you turn up the sound just a little bit more? That was no easy feat, I can tell you. And just to point out the power of just meeting these volunteers. The guys who owned the pub were trying to buy this old goods shed from the Tory council in Rushden in Northamptonshire, and they had wanted nothing to do with them. At my opening speech, I told them that they had fundraised £500,000 British to buy this shed, and it would be an absolute crime not to get the shed back, give the shed to these volunteers. And I think they were shamed into it, and they gave them the shed last year. And they're turning this into a centre of hybridity. We've been talking about hybrid spaces. This is going to be an exhibition space like it was for my show. It's also going to be a wedding venue, museum extension, and a number of other things that are happening for Civically for free for people. And this is what I did inside there. I did these temporary video installations all along the line. And I went and negotiated the use of these architectural follies that had laid redundant. And I converted them into temporary video installation, sound installation spaces. So this was the back of a Magdalen laundry in Mayo, which had a little chapel for the nuns to pray for their sins. And I lowered the ceiling, so you had to become half object, half ceiling, and inside it had a model Hornby rail set and tiny little video projectors projecting the films. Okay, of course, you know, my heroes are people like Buster Keaton. So I use the same kind of cinematic approaches and the same risks when I make my films. As I began saying, I talked about the bathtub. Well, this was my homage to Lilias in the bathtub. So now you know how I make my films. How did I make the bathtub come out of the suitcase? Truth be told, I had an angle grinder off site of the camera, and I pulled the bathtub out of the frame, cut an inch off it, put it back in the frame, cut an inch off it, stood back in the costume, took the photograph, while a whole load of German tourists were cycling on the Greenway watching me do this, all using remotes. And then I started with the book, and I will kind of end with the book. So I felt it was important to readdress that loss of that book that had gone out of print by making my own book. So this is my strange terrain, or my love poem to Lilias Campbell Davidson, and it's in 3 languages, each chapter relating to each little stop along all 3 railway lines. It's translated from Gaeilge, my language, Irish, to English and to Catalonian, and then it also came, this is what it looks like. I also discovered this thing called geocaching, which is all over the world, which is basically a bunch of nerds that plants treasure boxes everywhere at any different point, anywhere in your country. And I found the treasure boxes in the 3 countries, and I put my book in it. So you could find the book in little libraries, in little geocaches, and it had a little ticket book, like an old railway ticket book, that you scanned, which also was a flip book. You scanned it, and it played the animations that corresponded to each chapter on your little smartphone. So it was engaging other audiences, especially young teenagers who were incredibly tech savvy. And the last project in this thing, which I will then be quiet about, is in Catalonia, they love their giants, and I wanted to leave a legacy that would live beyond the temporary project. So I worked with the museum in Olot, which holds the oldest giants in Catalonia, the king and queen, and I worked with the giant makers to turn Pedro Casal's Marangelo, the last living train driver of the Olot to Girona line, into a giant. Now this is what he was supposed to look like. And when I went back to Catalonia to see what they'd done, they said that they wanted to make a love poem to me. So they gave him red hair and green Irish eyes. Anyway, it was a nice way to end the project. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks. Oh, I forgot to say, I'm going to pass that around, but I have a copy for all the panellists to thank them.